Welcome to Big Sports Radio. This is one of the hosts, Mike Kegley. We wanted to put together a compilation of what we think is a fantastic preview for the best non-conference game of the season when the Texas Longhorns go up to visit the Michigan Wolverines in Ann Arbor. We have been very fortunate to have three of our friends who come on the show regularly. Steve Kornacki, the writer of the Kornacki Wolverine Report on Substack, John Borton of the Wolverine.com, their senior columnist, and Anwar Richardson of OrangeBloods.com have come on to give you the insider's view of what to expect in this week's game. Clipped them together here for one interview. You can listen to our whole show, Big Sports Radio, by searching for that on any podcast distributor and download it. We'd love to have you subscribe to it so you won't miss an episode. We cover the Big Ten and all sorts of big events. But to make it easier for you, we put it all here. Hope you enjoy this. Thank you. Welcome back to Big Sports Radio. This is Mike Kegley. I'm here with Brad Sturdy, Larry Smith. We've got producer Tony Cordero on as well. And this is a treat. We have Steve Kornacki back on. Of course, we're not going to belabor this he's not the real Steve Kornacki because he's actually.
I've explained myself.
Yeah, you're older than Steve Kornacki. So there we are. But he covers the Michigan Wolverines for the Wolverine Report. And he's an alumnus of the Detroit Free Press, covers tons of sports, and he has given us a nice insider look at the Michigan Wolverines. Steve, Michigan plays a pretty impressive first game. Fans are grumbling what's wrong with the offense, but if I'm looking at a team coming into a season losing practically 13 players to the NFL draft, a head coach, multiple coaches off of the staff, that was a pretty good performance, wasn't it?
It wasn't bad. I mean, the defense looked really good. I mean, I think the defense is going to be up to last year's standards. They've got a lot of talent. They did a lot of good things. They look, there's no problems there. When you look at the offense, though, you've got 10 new starters. You got Colston Loveland, who they really leaned on in that first game. And everybody else is finding their way. You know, everybody else is a first-time starter, and they're trying to figure out what they have on offense. And they won by 20 points in a game that they were favored, I believe, by 20 and a half or 21 points. So, you know, if you want to believe the odds makers, that came in about where it should.
If you look at that defense going up now against Texas, which is a very good team, a very good offense, how do they get pressure on Quinn Ewers? How do they make Quinn Ewers uncomfortable? Do they have to blitz a lot, or can they get it off the front four?
I think they get it off the front four. I think they will mix it up, though. Wink Martindale has shown that he'll mix it up in what he does and also mix it up in personnel. There was a one series where Will Johnson, the superstar cornerback, didn't play until they got in the red zone, and Michigan fans are pretty upset about that. It's like, we want Will Johnson in for every play, but that's how he plays it, you know. So, you know, they'll keep him off balance. They've got a lot of speed, a lot of quickness, and what they really have is Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant in the middle. Oh my goodness gracious, those two guys are a handful. And you know, the team, you know what Fresno State did is they decided which guy they were going to double team on a given play, and then the other guy, you know, would get loose. But even Mason Graham got loose on a double team a couple of times. So that's what Michigan has going for it. Those two guys in the middle, and they've got Jayshon Barham, this linebacker that they recruited from Maryland, who came so close to blowing up a handful of plays. This guy is big and fast, and he's a man. I mean, he's a great addition to the defense. And then you got like the aforementioned Will Johnson on one corner, and everybody in the secondary is pretty good. You know, they've got a pretty good secondary, and they've got a lot of good people who played a lot last year, but didn't start. So the defense, I think, is going to be fine. But you're right. Texas is a great challenge. They, you know, that's a top-notch offense that they almost met in the national championship game. They barely lost to Washington last year. And, you know, they've got their quarterback back. And that's the key thing for any team, you know, is your quarterback back. And especially if he's a good one. And that's what Texas has. And Michigan will have its hands full.
How confident are the Wolverines coming into this? Because they are the defending national champions. They do have a spectacular defense. What's their mindset coming into what I consider the best pre-conference game of the whole season?
I think they're confident because it'd be hard for them not to be confident. They've won 29, their 29th straight regular season game, and that set the Big Ten record. That's the first team in the Big Ten history to win 29 regular season games, and this team expects to win. It's confident, and I can't tell you what they're thinking when they watch things in the film room. If that changes what their opinion is of their what their confidence level is, rather. But this team has a lot of confidence. They're not going to. They're going to come in expecting to win, even though they're I believe a touchdown underdog, which is I can't remember the last time they were an underdog at home, and I really can't remember the last time they were a 7-point underdog at home. You probably have to go back to pre-Harbaugh.
So given those two facts, the 7-point underdog coming in, two questions. One, does that put a little chip on their shoulder coming in that they want to prove the pundits wrong, and does that help them? And two, if you look at that quarterback position, what does the quarterback position have to do for Michigan to make sure they're in the game at the end?
You're right. I mean, that plays right into a coach's motivation during a week. They don't think we're any good. They think we're 7-point underdogs at home. What do you think about that, boys? You can almost hear the coaches, saying that kind of thing to the players, and that'll be a chip on the shoulder. I'm sure that they won't take kindly to that, and they'll use that as motivation. And the quarterback situation, it's funny, in the spring game, Davis Warren looked great, but Davis Warren wasn't a name. He was like 4th string quarterback last year. And so everybody thought, well, it was a spring game. I mean, is he really that good? And he barely missed having a great touchdown completion in this game. It became an interception, but you could see his confidence grow throughout the game once he got his feet on the ground as a starter. And that last touchdown drive, when Michigan really needed to score a touchdown, they were only up by 6 with like 10 minutes to go. They got it. And the line came out of nowhere. And like this line that had done nothing the whole game, and they were just mowing people. And Davis Warren's hitting, pass after pass, and then zips in that really crisp touchdown pass to Colston Loveland to end the drive and to put him comfortably ahead. He's a very headsy kid, as you probably know. He had leukemia as a teenager, and that's part of the reason he wasn't highly recruited. I mean, probably a big reason why he wasn't highly recruited. Harbaugh believed in him, brought him in, and in fact, Davis mentioned Jim after the game that I'm really doing this to pay back to Jim Harbaugh, and but not only Jim Harbaugh, but everybody who's here with me now, and the kid is a good story and a good kid, and he's a good leader. You watch him in the huddle; he's already got command of the huddle, and the thing we're asking ourselves is that last touchdown drive, is that Michigan, or was Michigan? It was Michigan, the Michigan that we saw earlier in the game, and we'll find out on Saturday, or it might take 3 Saturdays, but.
How is the offensive line gelling? Because a lot of talented players there who've went through the Michigan system, but still they're going out and taking over for a line that was really almost legendary.
Yeah, it didn't look good for most of the game, and they rotated centers, they rotated a few other guys on the line. Nobody had any real significant experience other than maybe Gio El-Hadi at the guard. He's played a lot. He's had some starts, but it's a new line, and people don't give the offensive line enough time to gel. And I think it's the part of the team that takes the longest to gel. And it's, you find your smartest players on the offensive line. And there was a reason for that a lot of teamwork and precision is required. And it's hard to do that as a first time offense. And we'll see what happens. Be real interesting. They've got a new offensive line coach, Grant Newsome, who I think is a real rising star coach, and he was a tight ends coach last year. So he's kind of following Sharon Moore's exact line of advancing. That's Moore came here as a tight ends coach and became the offensive line coach and became the coordinator, and then obviously now the head coach.
We saw in the championship game just what a home run threat Donovan Edwards can be. These days we don't talk so much about carries, but all coaches talk about touches. If you're game planning Michigan, if you're the offensive coordinator, Steve, how many touches do you want to see Donovan Edwards have when this game is over with? And if he gets those touches, do you think that puts them in a position to win that ball game?
I'd like to see him get 20 touches, and I think that does put them in a position to win the ball game. Although he's one of the strangest talents that I've seen, and you guys know what I'm talking about, because in that one Ohio State game, he looked like the best running back in the country, where he got two like 75 and 85-yard touchdown runs. And then the national championship game, his first two carries, 41 and 46, they were 40-yard touchdowns, both of them, his first two carries. And, to me, almost every big run he's had, he's sliced through the line. He's seen a gap in a lane that he can hit but they keep trying to run him around the corner. And for whatever reason, that hasn't worked for him, even though he's fast. He's almost better when he's patient and picks his hole. So I'd really like to see him do more of that in this game. And I don't know what the play is calling for him to do all the time. And I don't know how much freedom he's given to adjust, but he has to be a factor in this game. Although Kalel Mulling is, the backup tailback was great in this game. I mean, on the touchdown drive that they needed to secure the game, he goes 21, 15, 6 yards, 3 consecutive plays, banging off people, running confidently. And he said, I just thought all along, like, keep giving them gut punches, and they're not going to want to keep tackling. And he really came up big on that drive.
Yeah, a little bit of Tyrone Wheatley there almost with that size.
Tyrone was such a pleasure. Yeah.
Yes, he was so fun to watch. What do you expect then if I was going to ask you, predict to us how you see this Texas game going? What are you seeing in your crystal ball?
If the offense is the offense we saw in that game-winning drive, it's going to be a nail biter. It's going to go right down to the end. If the offense isn't that offense, Michigan could lose by a lot. So I think the defense is going to come to play, and that they're going to keep Michigan in the game. Definitely, no matter what happens. But the offense has to step up in order for Michigan to win this game.
And when you talk about, we've talked a lot here about the offense and what they have to do. We touched on the defense a little bit. If it comes down to a battle, who makes the big play for Michigan? Who is the hero in waiting? Maybe it's somebody we haven't heard of. Maybe it's somebody that who's that insider that you want, whether it be offense or defense, who makes that big play that gets Michigan a win?
The coming up front, I think it's Loveland or Donovan, but the sleeper in the weeds is Samaj Morgan, who has all kinds of game breaking abilities, and the way he runs reminds me of Desmond Howard. And he looked great when he started getting touches last year, and then he kind of became an average freshman, and in this game he had a couple of nice plays. But that guy, if you're looking for a sleeper player to really break out in this game and maybe do something big, which I think is what you're asking about, it would be Samaj Morgan, the wide receiver, number 0.
And do you think that defensive line will be able to get a ton of pressure on Texas? It seems to me if you can get Ewers under pressure, Texas is a little bit different team.
I think they will. And that's a very good point, because, when I saw McCord last year playing for Ohio State going into the Michigan game, I thought he doesn't have, if they can put pressure on him, he's not going to have any kind of impact on the game. And he only had a couple of nice plays, and it proved true. Michigan has put pressure on every quarterback they've faced for many, many games, and I think they will do so again.
If you enjoy Steve Kornacki, so you can read him on the Kornacki Wolverine Report on substack.com. Make sure you go over there and join. It is a good read, and you can tell right here that you're getting somebody who has not only understands the Wolverine program, but understands football. That's not the easiest thing to find in today's unique media situation that we're in right now.
I can appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. And folks, we will be right back after these commercials.
Thanks, fellas. It's my pleasure.
as we've been talking about a few moments ago, the big game this weekend is Michigan hosting Texas. It is so rare to see an SEC team travel north to play in a Big Ten city, even more, and both are nationally ranked. So get your popcorn out, and because you can be there and say you were there when it happened. Anwar Richardson, friend of the show, he's with orangebloods.com and joins us once again. Anwar, good to see you.
It's always good to be here. Always be with you and Tony. Always have a good time.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so here we go. We've talked a lot about the new world being in the SEC. You've dipped your toe in the water. How's it feel so far? Texas no longer being in the Big 12.
Yeah, I mean, they haven't necessarily been in the SEC and played the SEC game yet, but we've been talking about it for 3 years, so there's been this long buildup, and it's finally there. It's finally happened. Of course, Texas gets a chance to be a part of the SEC media days, SEC spring meetings before that. So, I've always felt that Texas was built for the SEC and built for success in the SEC. I didn't feel like the transition would be a tough one for them. It's basically because when Sark got in here, when they were in the Big 12, the thought process and the belief was, well, at some point to get to the playoffs, you're going to have to face an SEC team. So they started building a roster that they felt like could compete with SEC programs even before the SEC thing happened. So what that meant was trying to recruit on the offensive line and getting those dogs, those hogs that you need to compete in the SEC, recruiting the big guys in the defensive line as well. And so being able to put those components in there, and then having speed on the outside, speed on the defense. Like, they knew what the blueprint was because they were there at Alabama. They saw what that thing looked like. They saw like, oh, well, this is what driving, a Lambo looks like. It's kind of like you ever go and rent a car and you drive, and it's like a brand new SUV. You're like, wow, people live life like this, huh? And then you get back into your 2014 Mazda. You're like, well, at least it's paid for. So that's where Texas was at, right? They're like, oh, this is what we need to get. This is what kind of we need to upgrade, right? And so, and they've upgraded. And so, what the thing that you'll see, and you saw it last year, you saw them when they went into Tuscaloosa, and you saw them beat that team in Tuscaloosa by double digits, right? You're going to see a team this Saturday that kind of reflects that and doesn't necessarily have a drop off, even though they had 11 guys going to the NFL. The transfer portal could be the great equalizer. Don't tell that to Clemson, but it could be the great equalizer that's out there. And they brought in a lot of weapons as well. So you're going to see a really potent offense and a really strong defense this weekend.
Now, we're going to talk about Clemson a bit later and the issues they've got down there in South Carolina. But, when you look at the four teams that reached the playoff last year, yeah, 11 players gone, but the other three programs went through massive change. Even on top of that, I mean, Texas is the stable one out of the four.
Texas is the only one that technically still has their coach remaining from the playoffs. You basically, obviously Washington, even though it goes over to Alabama, but the Washington situation's gone. Obviously, what happened with Jim Harbaugh, he's out. And then of course, and of course Bama, because Nick Saban retired. So they have the most stable of all the programs. And when you start going into this contest, you start looking into it, the thing that gives Texas an advantage over not just about every team they're going to face this year, and definitely gives an advantage this weekend, is the quarterback. They've got Quinn Ewers. They've got a guy that's going into year 3. That means something. You can't say that doesn't mean something to say you got a 3-year starter who has been in hostile environments, who has played in big games, that won't necessarily get rattled. And this won't be the first for him. This for him is going to say, oh, you know what? We played in the semis, last year. I'm kind of used to a big game and what I need to do. Played against Bama last year. Okay, so when he goes into the big house, it's going to be 100,000. But for a guy like Quinn Ewers, he's going to look at that thing and say, okay, been there, done that. I'll be okay. And when you look at Michigan, and this is where I think Michigan is in trouble, okay? And this is where I think the problem that they have. Look, when we grew up watching football in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, it was all about defense, right? I mean, we would see 13-10 kind of games, and we would see 9-6. Like that wasn't totally uncommon. Those Nebraska teams that would dominate. But nowadays in college football, you have to have an offense. Like you, I don't care how good you think your defense is. And they can talk to me about how good that Michigan defense is. That offense was pretty damn inept in the past game. Davis Warren completed 15 of 25 passes for 118 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, a passer rating of, where was he at? His passer rate was 104.85. Now, and that was against Fresno State. Now, am I supposed to believe that there will be some sort of meteoric jump in performance going against a top 5 team the next week? And when you're talking about, you got to duel, like the team that beat Texas last year. Think about the 2 teams that beat Texas last year. It was Oklahoma, and they had Dylan Gabriel. It was Washington, and they had Penix, right? So think about what it takes to win in today's world of college football. If you're telling me that's the offense that you're going to put out there, I don't care if you got a good run game. If you don't have the passing game to support it, and we didn't see anything close to that. We saw a QB battle that really came up to the last moment, and that's when they went with him. That's where I think they're going to be in a little bit of trouble, going against Texas, because this is a track meet. They've got guys, they've got athletes, they've got receivers. Like, you've got to be able to go. And if you can't go, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah. Talking with Anwar Richardson, again, with orangebloods.com. Great friend. We always enjoy his insights on Texas football. A year ago, the Longhorns went into Tuscaloosa and got the win over Alabama that really catapulted them into the national spotlight, into that, top 5 all year long, and they reached the playoff. Are there any similarities with this game? Look, listen, yeah. Michigan's the defending champ on paper, absolutely. But again, it's a totally different team in the coaching room and in the locker room than it was last year. But what are the similarities in terms of them getting this win on the road in the big house, national TV, and what it means for them coming up when we get to December?
Great question. There is a similarity, obviously, when you start talking about storied programs, powerhouse programs. And so you won't have to get Texas pumped up and amped up. The thing for Texas, though, is that game gave them that confidence. Because it's easy when coaches come in and they tell you, this is what we're building for, this is what we're trying to achieve. But you have to have that moment, that signature victory as a coach, that you can tell them, this is what that was for, right? And so I remember being in Tuscaloosa, and after that game, someone from the Texas staff grabs me and says, you see, this is why we were practicing in that 110-degree heat all summer long when you thought we were crazy. It was the buildup to get to that moment, right? And so now Steve Sarkisian points out that they got 46 players on this team that traveled to Tuscaloosa last year that are going to be going to Michigan this year. And so they start talking about having that leadership component, understanding this, what a hostile environment is going to look like. This is what you should expect. And then being able to come through it and knowing, okay, this is the blueprint. Like, you got to have the blueprint. And so many coaches, they talk about it, but Sark, he can at least effectively communicate that he has a blueprint that's there. And the other thing that's going to be, I think, a tough thing for Michigan is that Texas is able to put up 52 points against Colorado State without really showing much of their offense. One thing Sark loves to do is he loves the deep ball, because he believes in having speed. You guys remember the days of those big-bodied receivers. You've got to have the next Calvin Johnson, right? You got to have a guy who's 6'4" and 200 and something pounds. I think when Sark got there and he got to see what was his name, Devontae, was it Smith, the one who the Alabama receiver that got drafted? I think he's with the Eagles now. And he saw 6 foot, 175 pounds, but saw that guy was a burner. He's like, you know what? I like guys like that. Give me an Xavier Worthy. Give me an Adonai Mitchell. Give me those burners. And now he goes into this season, and it's very similar where he's got an Isaiah Bond that transferred in that's similar. He's got a guy like Silas Bolden went from Oregon State, who's all about 5'8", and maybe 165, 170 pounds, but he is a burner. They brought in Matthew Golden, a receiver from Houston. They've got a 5-star by the name of Ryan Wingo, who's a freshman who led the team in receiving last year. This past game, Jonte Cook is a 5-star receiver as well, who's on this team, who's going into his second year. And they also got a guy by DeAndre Moore, who's a young guy. I'm telling you, they got dudes. Like I'm not, and I haven't even gotten to their running back, who is really, really special as far as the running backs that they have there. But they've got a running back that is kind of a lights out kind of guy. Reminds me a little bit more of a Tony Pollard kind of look. And so Sark is going to go in, and of course they've got a great offensive line. So we start talking about that defensive line. You also have a great offensive line from Texas that's been together. They've got a guy at the left tackle, Kelvin Banks. He's a top 5 pick, more than likely, might be the first offensive tackle that's off the board. If not, he's probably a top 10 as far as that is concerned. They got a Jake Majors, who I believe is either 4th or 5th year starter at center. They've got guys on the outside who are future NFL. They've got an NFL offensive line. And so again, so you start talking about the similarities. The one thing they understood, and when you saw that Alabama game, is that on the line of scrimmage, Texas ended up winning that battle. Offensive line, defensive line. Now, I'm a little uncertain about the defensive line, the interior of Texas. But what I can say is, if the offense is going to play like we saw against Fresno State, it don't matter because what they have will be good enough to get by. And if Texas gets by this, by the way, and wins this game, I can tell you this. After that, they've got UTSA, they've got La Monroe, they've got Mississippi State. All that before they get to Oklahoma. This is a team that they get past Michigan. We're talking about 5-0, and top 2, top 3 for the next few weeks.
Yeah, no question. And then Oklahoma, Georgia, back-to-back next month. You're right. That's the big I love the schedule way it sets up for Texas. Well, listen, enjoy the trip. Enjoy your time up in Ann Arbor, and go Horns.
All right, man. You guys take care.
Hook 'em. All right. Anwar Richardson again, orangebloods.com. Be sure to give him a follow on X. Love his insights. Number 3, Texas at 10th ranked Michigan coming up here on Saturday. We've got more to come here on Big Sports Radio. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the show. This is Mike Kegley here with Larry Smith, Brad Sturdy. We have Tony Cordero, our producer, who will be on air as well. And we're lucky to have with us John Borton, who is the senior columnist at the Wolverine.com. He has been covering the Michigan Wolverines for 34 years. So Tony was only 1 year old when John started. So John, this game, I personally have had circled. The Texas visits Michigan. I've had this circled since the day it was announced as the best non-conference game in all of college football this year. Am I wrong?
Oh, I don't think you're wrong. I think there are questions about whether or not the defending national champions, the home team, the Wolverines, are going to be up to the standard that everybody was hoping, at least Michigan fans, that they would be, and trying to continue. But you also have a team that lost its star quarterback, its entire offensive line, has a lot of elements on the defense left, but they only have one returning starter on offense. So I think there are some question marks, certainly more about Michigan at this point than about Texas, which comes in as a 7-point favorite. But there's no question, just the names alone, Michigan, Texas, and you saw what the Wolverines pulled off last year, no longer headed by Jim Harbaugh, but headed by the guy that Sharon Moore that was so just vital to their entire effort last year, stepped in when Jim Harbaugh was suspended, won at Penn State as the head coach, won against Ohio State. So I think there's a lot of optimism in Ann Arbor, despite those losses, including half of last year's coaching staff. The question in this game becomes, can they do it this early? Can they pull it together after, you look at last week in Fresno State, they're up only 6 points with 10 minutes to go. I guarantee you that 110,000 in Michigan Stadium were right on the edge of their seats. But there's no question. It's a huge game early. Game day be in town. It'll be it's just one of those that everybody will be watching early.
It's tough to dissect those early games against an inferior opponent, right? They come in, it's just kind of a warm up for the team, get ready. A lot of teams play them. What did you learn, having watched this program for 30 years? What did you learn in that game this past weekend that you think will help Michigan against Texas?
Well, I think I learned a couple of things. Certainly that Michigan is going to be winning early this year on the defensive side of the football. And Michigan's defense gives it its very best chance against Texas. If Michigan holds Texas to, say, 17, 20 points, that gives the Wolverines a real opportunity to win. And I'm telling you, this defense is going to be elite once again. You've got NFL players on the defensive side of the football. You look like a guy like Mason Graham at defensive tackle. Everybody remembers him from the Rose Bowl, how he was the MVP in the Rose Bowl as a defensive lineman. And so he's really, really good. You got Jayshon Barham, transfer from Maryland at the linebacking core. And this is a guy that was set out of some of the drills in the fall because he was too violent. They were worried about him hurting people. In the defensive backfield, you've got a really strong group there of guys. And I just think that between the defense and they have got a kicker in Dominic Zavada, a place kicker, who nailed a 52-yard and 55-yard field goals in that game. That was a possible question mark for this team that seems to have been answered in dramatic fashion.
This Michigan offensive line may not be a bunch of guys who have gotten a lot of time, but these are guys who've been trained the Michigan way. What can we expect from them when they go up against this Texas defense?
Well, I will say this, they expect of themselves to take a big step forward from last week because there were some issues there. There were guys being traded in and out, and you're still looking for that combination. And as one of the guys I talk to on a regular basis here puts it, look, it's like having a new dance partner. You've got an all new starting line. These are guys that have played before, but they haven't played necessarily together as a unit against different opposition. And, there were some things that were missed in there. And it took until later in that game, till the run game started clicking. And sometimes the pass protection was a little bit off. And that put more pressure onto Davis Warren, who was making his first start in a Michigan uniform. And so, that was something that built on itself. You had this team on automatic pilot offensive line wise the last 2 years because you had a NFL roster up front and they just could bury people. This offensive line, at least in the opener, wasn't near that level. And it has a lot of potential. But that has to be realized next Saturday for all of this to, come about. And so that you're not putting the stress on the defense to try to almost pitch a shutout against a Texas team that you're not going to do that to.
When you look at that defense and knowing that they've got to come up big, what can that secondary do to kind of rattle Quinn Ewers, get him off his mark, make him uncomfortable?
Well, they've got guys that are going to sit on routes and certainly take advantage. They broke that game open against Fresno State on an 86-yard interception, where you got probably the one of the best cornerbacks in the country jumps the route and he takes off. But those guys are going to get a lot of help from that defensive line and the front seven, the pass rush. They're going to make it uncomfortable for him. The one thing that has changed greatly for Michigan is you've got Wink Martindale, who has coached many, many years in the NFL, flipping the switches now. And this is a guy that loves to put the heat on a quarterback, loves to blitz. He's got a lot of options. I mentioned Jay-Sean Barnum. You look at him, and he's a guy who has exceptional speed and quarterback pursuit. I would watch for blitzes out of him. I would watch for them mixing it up and getting some strong pressure off the edges. Derek Moore is a young man who is in there on that last play, that game-clinching play against Alabama in the Rose Bowl, and he has stepped up to a starting position. You just got a lot of guys. You could be sending people from a lot of different positions. They will mix it up. I think they'll be very creative in how they attack things.
From the side of the Wolverines rushing the ball, Edwards, it's one game. It's the first game of the year, but certainly was a little less productive than people anticipated. Mullings picked up the slack. What needs to be done to fix the rushing game? And then who do you think is going to be the back who's getting the yards for the Wolverines?
Well, I think it starts up front with working out some of the bugs from last week, but either of the guys that you mentioned is very capable. At this point, Khalil Mullings, who spent 3 years as a linebacker for the Wolverines, and now, these last couple of years has been a running back. He says he's finally starting to get very comfortable as a running back, and you can see it. He can get the tough yards. He plays. He runs really hard. He can go inside the tackles. It seems that Donovan Edwards at this stage of his career is still kind of the home run hitter who maybe doesn't have as great a vision and sometimes misses some of these opportunities. I tell you what, when he gets in the open field, ask Ohio State what he's like, or ask some of ask Washington. He did it again in the national championship game. He can make the big plays, but doesn't, as does Mullings, make the plays on a play-to-play basis. Mullings simply ran the ball better against Fresno State. So we're gonna see where what they do with that. I will say this as well: Donovan Edwards is a really good receiver out of the backfield, so that might be a way in which the Wolverines get Donovan Edwards open in space in a game such as this and have something special up their sleeve for Texas.
If you're looking at this game, games come down to styles, almost like prize fights. Styles make fights. Styles can make football games. If Michigan had their druthers, would this be a low-scoring game or would this be a shootout? Where do they figure to be better if it's a tight ball game or if the offenses are going up and down the field?
They would like this game, I'm guessing, to be something that would make Bo Schembechler and Woody Hayes smile big. We remember 14-11 or that sort of thing. It's not going to be that, but along those lines, because for all the reasons we talked about. This offense, I don't believe, is ready to win a shootout yet, this Michigan offense. I think that certainly Davis Warren is a capable passer, but he's still getting his feet under him. We talked about some of the inconsistencies up front in the running game. I don't see Michigan winning a game that's even high 30s. But I do see Michigan winning a 2017 game or something along those lines if you get a great defensive effort. And these days, that is a great defensive effort. And, it becomes a field position game. It becomes one of those things. But that means you're going to have to stop a Texas offense or slow it down that is pretty darn explosive. Michigan has some, I guess, experience doing that, because look at the offenses that Ohio State has churned out the past several years. And since the advent of the defensive coordinators that have come through the Baltimore Ravens system, that was what really bailed everything out for Jim Harbaugh in turning it around. And all of a sudden, you're hanging with Ohio State, and instead of scoring 60 or 54 or whatever it might be, they're coming up with something in the mid-20s. And that gave Michigan the ability to win. That's what you need in this game for Michigan to hang in there and pull this one off.
Well, John, thanks for coming on the show. Of course, if you folks enjoyed what you heard from John, he is longtime reporter or columnist for the Wolverine.com. You can get all the Wolverine news from him.